Catching up with the commissioner of the Southeastern Conference, Greg Sankey.
And welcome back. Let's listen in for the Greg Sankey of the SEC commissioner. Let's listen in before we close this out.
Nobody seems really that enthused about that. But yeah, we're really in a good spot. We're 9 of the top 25 in the AP poll on the men's side, 7 of the top 25 on the women's side. Last 3 national championships in women's basketball come from here. We had a team back in the Final Four. 6 of our coaches on both sides have coached in Final Four, so we're gonna be pretty good again.
That's good. Seems consistent.
I put that concise basketball promo right there.
I like it. They'll be all over. Let's talk about what the folks that cover college athletics are talking about. They're still talking about it nearly a week later, and that's what happened last week with you and Tony Petitti and the athletic directors from both leagues in Nashville, and all the things that have come from that. I realize it's hard to encapsulate. You've talked about it with Tony, but there's a lot to drill down on, and where are we?
I think what I've seen are maybe 3 different categories of these observers, these writers. One is those who listened to what was said, what was communicated when Tony and I met and responded to questions after our meeting in Nashville about what took place. I think the second are those who seem to write things that, hey, they're great headline grabbers, like we're out to have this scheduling agreement. And that's, nobody's called and talked to me about that in the media. So these articles are being written off of, well, somebody said or somebody heard. And then there's plenty of opinions when you gather, right? I live in a role where people will write opinions. So if we go back, Paul, to what happened, I think just a set of really important categories. One, we have a settlement, as you and I have talked about, in the House versus NCAA litigation. It's an opportunity to create a structure around the economic relationship with the student athletes. It's transformational. A lot of questions, a lot of work. We're at a time of transition in that transformation. In the middle of anything is messy. The beginning is fun. Oh, look at this excitement. The end is relief, and we're in the middle, so it's a little bit messy right now. We then spent time on the college football playoff, not about some grand takeover, but understanding what happens first this year and understanding our roles in decision making in the future. We've spent no real time on the what ifs of the 26 season and beyond, because that's a new contract. We need to see what happens with this year's 12-team playoff, with the SEC at 16. Other conferences are at 18, the Big Ten and the ACC, and our Big 12 partners are with 16 as well. So let's see what happens this year. Let's learn from that, and we'll come back to that conversation. So I think a lot of overstatements there. And then you get into regular season scheduling and postseason football. So I'll do postseason first. We have a bunch of relationships that include the Big Ten now. Those are meaningful games. There's a little bit of chest beating depending on how things go. What do we do in the future? I think that's a fair conversation. And then what is neat to see on a graphic, so here's what happened in the room. We put a graphic up, our staff's prepared, that showed in 25, 26, 27, I think out to like 32, 33, where the Big Ten and SEC teams have already agreed to play regular season contests. And in, I think, 26, 27, we have 5 or so. And you think back to the COVID year and even the few years before, we played almost no non-conference games against Big Ten opponents. So we had a conversation. Here's how the conversation went. Hey, we do this naturally. Do you want to just leave it in your campus hands? We could do something coordinated with the conference offices, but you have to work with us. Is there something else out there? That's like a third category. And people said, you know what, maybe you guys keep talking, see what you can do. That's not an agreement. And I would just caution, the Pac-12 and Big Ten had an agreement a decade ago that never really came to fruition. There was this alliance thing that was supposed to have scheduling. It never came to fruition. So I think you and I know each other well enough that you understand we need to be careful of what we say. And can we have conversations? Sure. Do they get leaked? Sure. Does everybody react if there's some giant move afoot? No, but we ought to be having these conversations, because being in Ann Arbor, credit to our hosts in Michigan with Texas, you just sit there and say, wow, man, what if you could do this more often? Whether it's in Maryland or in Oxford, Mississippi, or up in Minnesota, and have them come down to Baton Rouge, something like that. I think we ought to talk about that.
I realize this is, I'm not asking you to become a journalism professor, but I do wonder, I'm sure you do, how things that you coordinate and host with Commissioner Petitti end up looking sometimes the way they do.
Well, somebody once asked me when I moved to the SEC from the Southland Conference, like, what's the biggest difference in working there and here? And I'm like, in the Southland Conference days, which is almost 25 years ago, I never.
This is
had
Greg
a phone
Sankey,
call
the
in morning
SEC
that was
commissioner.
scrolling on ESPN that night, and that happens regularly. So there's an immunity factor. I do. Tony and I have worked together well, and we have some common views. We don't agree on everything. You know what? I enjoy working with Brett Yormark and Jim Phillips. I had two phone calls today with commissioners, one in the FCS world, one in that group of 6 now as we see it at the FBS. So I'm more than willing to be in conversation. I don't think headlines will be written about that, but I understand when it's the SEC and Big Ten, it provokes a great deal of interest.
What I've noticed is the Big Ten fans, and we're talking just about anecdotal evidence here, they now feel a kinship, which they've never felt before. And I think the SEC folks, I mean, it's the weirdest thing that has nothing to do with reality, but it is out there.
You can go back in our actual physical library and find minutes from meetings in the 30s, like typed minutes still in the books, where a pretty strong disagreement between the onboarding of athletic scholarships. There used to be a lot of work programs and outside programs, so everybody who complains about what happens now, there is a disagreement. You think about it in the early mid-30s, in the midst of the Great Depression, there weren't a lot of jobs in this region to just give to student athlete participants, and so it made athletic scholarships real. And there's always been a little bit of tension. I wanted to win that Rose Bowl last year. We did not as a league, and so we wanted women's basketball, the game against Iowa in the Final Four. So, we're going to have those rivalries. I think there's an openness and a recognition of the new era that provides the conditions for conversation.
There have been a lot of descriptions, and that's fine. Writers have to come up with things, but there is at least a feeling or perception that you and now Tony Petitti are literally sitting there running the world, at least the world of intercollegiate athletics. I mean, there's a reality to it. I mean, these are powerful leagues. When you see descriptions like that, do they look realistic to you? Do you laugh? Do you cringe?
Yeah.
What do you do?
Oh, shucks. I'm just a guy born in Auburn, New York, went to Cortland State, intramural director at Utica College, just doing the best job I can.
You're doing a great job.
I think we have a responsibility to continue to make progress. If we can do that with people, that's much healthier. And I think Tony and I are both attentive to our conferences, to our working relationship with each other, our working relationship with the people around us, and we'll continue to be in. If we can bring people into problem solving, in a big way, Division I, I think that's success, and that's a bit of the opportunity in front of us. In fact, the conversations and the points of outreach I've had today, which there were 2 other points this week from others kind of not in that Autonomy 4 group, that I think indicate the health of conversations and relationships still being important.
And this is particularly fascinating, not to dig up dirt, but it wasn't that long ago when you were trying to move the ball forward with a couple of your friends on the CFP, and some of these people just would not let it happen for some of the pettiest of reasons.
Sure, and it's interesting to read some of this commentary about me or us. I think it's natural to learn from those experiences. So we started down a path. You recall, we were not the ones advocating for that growth. That came from every other corner of the bowl subdivision world as we know it in college football. By the way, if I controlled everything, we wouldn't use that nomenclature to describe our bigger group. And, it didn't take place. Well, you learn from that. And it doesn't mean you necessarily have you don't have the ability to just drive decisions, but you just think about how strategically you move forward.
There was an absolutely fascinating piece done on you a couple weeks ago. I think it was about Jesse Dougherty of the Washington Post. And I'm not intending for you to be dismissive of the people you just got through complimenting, but it was interesting, and I wanted to share with the audience something that you had said that, yes, sure, you learned from your colleagues, but you also look differently and in various other places, like leaders of corporations, world leaders. I don't want to jump on your own comment, but it was really one of the most interesting comments I've heard from anyone in intercollegiate athletics.
Sure, and there were a couple comments. If I don't hit the right one was, we're going to this meeting with Tim Cook, and he gave me 90 minutes, incredibly gracious. And I didn't say this to Jesse, I should have when I finished. Like, you can't go in there with your old pen and ink notebook and take notes. So as soon as I left, I went to a Starbucks across the street from the old Apple headquarters, wrote everything I could remember as quickly as I could. And as I was traveling there, my wife Kathy was with me, and I said, I don't know why I'm doing this. I'm fascinated, but is this going to have value? And she said, I bet you could pick up the phone and call any CEO in the country, and they'd take a meeting with you. And nobody's ever said no at this point. And those are learning experiences, and it helps. This guy from Auburn, New York, went to Cortland State. Expand his thinking, expand his horizons. And I've been around some incredible military leaders with in-depth conversations. You have 2-star, 3-star, 4-star generals. I have a great friend in Austin who's introduced me to some of his West Point colleagues, West Point alum. And it is absolutely fascinating to think about the relationships, the decisions they've had to make. When we were looking at Rich Clark for the CFP, Rich provided just leadership lessons within the interview process. And I'll go back to, so one of the points was access those folks. And then how do you think outside our little echo chamber of college sports? I think that was embedded in it. So when you're in this, and week to week, this is the biggest thing going on. There's a lot going on in the world outside of college football. And so the ability to call some folks outside of college sports and say, how does it look like from the outside in, from where you sit? What should I think about? I will say with Tim, I said, where do we get it right? That was the first question we're trying to figure out. And he said, Paul Feinbaum. And then he said SEC Nation on Saturday mornings, which you have role in. So throw that nugget out there. Well, see that scroll on the bottom.
I've always thought a lot of Tim, but I can't emphasize it enough. But I think for a commentator here, I think that's what has helped aid your discovery and, as a result, the week you represent, because it is not just your typical conventional thinking.
Well, yes, and you have to understand the platform. So it's much less about me than it is about the seat I occupy. And I had the benefit of watching Mike's live, and then still I talked to Roy Kramer 2 weeks ago, and they had the benefit. Hopefully when I'm in those conversations, I'm an interesting participant in dialogue back and forth, and perhaps they can learn something from me as well.
We're with the commissioner here in Birmingham. We'll take a short break. Back with more right after this.